Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For those who are old members of the Executive Book Club, you would know that we last saw each other in November. We just checked in with one another, and incidentally, the book that Riaan discussed with you at that time was around mental models. So without consulting with each other, we have now extended the theme into mindset, which we will speak about in a moment. For those of you who are new to this, welcome. And this is about us reading on your behalf. And once a month, we take a book, preferably a business book. We read it, we extract the gist of it, and then we share it here with you. And then Riaan and I, we kind of spontaneously check in while we do this. So sometimes you may be confused who's presenting and who's not presenting in this space, but so be it. For those of you who are observant, you will see something strange on this slide. At the top, you would see Stellenbosch Business Institute and Edu was at work. Let me just quickly explain that in a slide. In the middle of COVID, we decided to acquire one of the largest private universities in South Africa, and that was Pearson's Institute of Higher Education, which we then branded in the process to Edubos, and you ought to see much of that in the media, in the social media especially. And as you would know from a business point of view, at the moment you do such acquisitions, one of the things that you're looking for is a synergy. And part of that synergy for us was to start with a migration process of some of the activities of Stellenbosch Graduate Institute into a unit within Edubos called Stellenbosch Business Institute. And you will see the tagline of Edubos at work, kind of playing on the concept of the new world of work and how we operate in that space. As you would also know, we have also once a month the Directors Hour, where we had a partner there, Fluid Rock, who operated that with us. They are now doing their own set of webinars, but we will continue with the Directors Hour in that space on the same themes and working around the dynamics in boardrooms. So the main thing is the Edubos component, which we feel very proud about and share it with you, and it is really a great space to be in. And then the notion of SBI, or Stellenbosch Business Institute, that is call it an executive education business school component within Edubos, and you should see more about that in the near future. All right, so in this book that we are dealing today, one of the things that comes out of this is one learn how a simple belief about yourself, actually nothing earth-shattering, guides a large part of your life, and it really filters into all parts of your life. And out of this whole book, these two concepts coming out of a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Now, the book is called Mindset. The edition that we're dealing with here is the updated edition, and it is written by Dr. Carol Dweck. I looked into some of her YouTube videos. I was surprised that she was born in 1946 because she looks so good and vibrant and energetic, etc. So she's really a very impressive woman. She's a psychologist. She's the Lewis and Virginia Eaton Professor of Psychology at Stanford University. She's very much known for her work on mindset. And she's also a fellow of the Association of Psychological Science. about the book, first published in 2006 by Random House. Then the revised edition came out 2017. There's the ISBN number. This session is recorded, so when you get the URL or the link afterwards, you can then go back to this. Riaan, last time I got a book cheaper than you, so I don't know, this time it's around about 300.
I don't know, like for some reason I always pay 15 US cents more. So I think it's every time they look at my camera and I look so excited and then they just the prices.
All right, and it can be ordered from Takealot or Amazon, but I would imagine there would be other platforms as well that can do that for you. So the structure of the book is basically, there's an introduction, then chapter 1, there are 8 chapters, the mindset, inside the mindset, the truth about ability and accomplishment. Then chapter 4, there's the application on the sport, in the sports field, the mindsets of a champion. Then in business, where I think we will spend a bit more time, mindsets in leadership. Chapter 6 on the relationships, mindsets in love, and then parents, teachers, and coaches, which I found a very interesting chapter, and actually focusing on where do mindsets come from. Just a personal note on this, there is a part in chapter 7 called false growth mindsets. Now, I would, if I knew that before, I would first read those 2 or 3 pages, and then I'll start the book, because then I have something kind of to measure it against as I read through the book, but be that as it may. And then chapter 8 is changing mindsets, which is very practical, and a plethora of things that she covers, about 12 components that she covers in that, in how do you go about changing mindsets with all kinds of ideas. But the bottom line of this book is that there are 2 mindsets. It's kind of a fixed mindset, and that is something which dictates that our ability to achieve is unchangeable. It's kind of, this is my talent, this is my capability, this is it, and with this I must perform. I can't do anything more than that. And then there's the growth mindset, which says that may be true, but we can improve our abilities through challenging work and through practice. So where the fixed mindset, because of that way of thinking, will take failures personally, but in the growth mindset, failures kind of indicates, well, it's a wake-up call, it's time to grow, it's put a bit more hard work in there, be a bit more open for criticism, etc. So that's the basic theme going through the book. So chapter 1 is first of all dealing with mindsets in principle. And if you're interested in this, there are a number of books, I think. Apart from the book that you handled, Riaan, we also handled one, Changing Minds, a bit earlier last year, which is also on our repository at YouTube, which people can have a look at in that sense. But Dweck, a kind of the concept she comes up from is doing a heck of a lot of research among different sets of people. And she observed this in children, that when she became aware of this, when you give a group of children puzzles, they seem to react differently in how they approach that puzzles. And some kids enjoyed especially difficult, harder puzzles, enjoyed it more than others. And many times the others would seem to be more capable individuals, but more of a fixed mindset. And then when they get this challenge of the puzzle and they seem to get resistance in solving it, they don't want to give up the notion that they are actually okay and capable, and so they shy away from it, while the children with a growth mindset tend to take those puzzles and struggle through it and then solve it in that process.
And it's so interesting, Frik. I've been in touch with Professor Dweck's research over the past couple of years. I'm very interested in how people learn, and one of the key things that she did is actually she worked with a company called BrainPoint that went into designing games for children, okay, and you would get, they built an AI or algorithm into it that analyzed the strategy that you're taking to solve the problem. And if you took a different or innovative strategy, it gave you more points. And she said it was actually quite funny because the game that they made eventually, if you just zipped through it, if you just went and you answered the first one, second one, and could do it automatically, you got no score. And the game apologized to you to sit and say, sorry, we didn't challenge you. And it's interesting, people like the challenge of the game a lot more. And I think that's an interesting thing that we're also ironically seeing with AI, is that computers like solving harder problems because it takes more processing power. So it's like we've got this computational ability that needs to be satisfied, and as long as we're willing to learn, it's more interesting for an organism to deal with it, because I think ultimately it enhances the survival of a species if they are able to solve harder problems.
That's very interesting. I'm just wondering on the site whether that AI need to solve tougher problems is a function of the programmer or the coder having a growth mindset in the process.
Yeah, but it tends to be that because there is a bigger problem to solve, it takes longer, but the type of solution then becomes more useful going forward. And I think that's exactly the idea, and I'm sure we'll talk about that just now.
Yeah. So delving into the mindsets, especially in the fixed mindset, she came to the conclusion that fixed mindsets fears risk. And the reason for that is it carries the possibility of failure in it. And even effort towards solving that is a bit suspect for them, because her argument is that the fixed mindset is kind of arguing, well, if I have to try and fix it, it means that I'm not good enough in the first place. If I'm good enough, I would solve it. So why try and do it? If I can't do it, then leave it. So it's kind of that this mindset results into a skewed perception of your own capabilities. But when she observed the people which now categorize kind of in the growth mindset, just a note on the side, she does in the later chapters do say, although we speak in kind of a binary mode here, we have a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So we need to ask at some point what triggers it when we catch ourselves being in a fixed mindset in that process. But we can have a shot at that maybe a bit later. But just if you kind of have a feeling that I'm just pushing it a bit to the extreme here, growth and in two separate categories like that. So, but those in a growth mindset, they tend to estimate their capabilities a bit more accurately, and they see both their strengths and their weaknesses, and so they tend not to be too critical or too sensitive for criticism in that space.
Yeah, I think I saw somebody that asked her if there's any value to having a fixed mindset, and she said there's only two places where it's been found useful to have a fixed mindset, and one is to realize that you are going to die. Yeah, that's a fixed mindset that we can all kind of stick to and get it. I forget the other one now, but it's like it's not really it's not something that's is useful, but it's something that's very easy to get into. And what struck me about especially the fixed mindset, because I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the growth mindset, but is how easy it is to paint somebody into a picture. And I was reflecting actually on the current situation with Vladimir Putin, where he's basically in such a stuck pattern that he cannot stop doing what he's doing because he's in a fixed mindset. He has to lose or, I don't know, in his mind he has to win, but there is just no other way, because of this possibility of failure. And I think that that's the very, very interesting thing, is that we are so, and often as kind of star performers, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more, is you get into a space where you're expected to perform, you perform well, and you get praised for it, and now you have this absolute dread that is, I cannot fail. And you tend to do the things, the tricks and the interesting ideas that got you to the point where you won, and you keep on repeating the pattern, and it becomes a pattern, and that pattern, it becomes a mindset that's actually so destructive.
Yeah, I also find this very interesting in terms of this whole field. Because Dweck is not alone in this. She also refers to some psychologists and their research and what they've done. If you look at the psychologist Robert Steenberg, he performed extremely poor on his IQ test at school. Yeah. But he excelled later in life just because he took another view on things. The neuroscientist Gilbert Gottlieb, which he refers to, saying, and that's interesting because I'm reading another book now on the changing minds at the moment, which this really resonates with. And he says it's like this vector we have underneath our DNA, and we have those genetic codes, but they are not fixed. It is the life conditions or the options that happens in the space that actually starts triggering and switching some off and switching some aspects of it on in that space. So Gottlieb says it's the genes and the environment needs to cooperate. So the genes needs the input of the environment to really work properly in that space. And I find that a fascinating piece of this field of mindsets and the brain.
Yeah, and I think the field of epigenetics, which you're talking about, is gaining. There's a lot more understanding of how we codify experience into our genes and how our genes express in the environment. And these were very heretical ideas earlier, but it's interesting how that actually goes into the kind of fears and risk category as well. I see we have a question here, Frik, that is saying that to what extent does different personality types become a kind of decider or a big influencer on whether one has a fixed or a growth mindset?
I don't think she addresses that particularly, but in this book that I'm reading on changing mindsets, that personality is also that personality is also a function of the genes and the environment playing together. But that's a total different conversation. But there is a lot of research being done in that space, and there is of course a cross-referencing between that.
Yeah, I also think that if you look at personality, it's easy to. It's like astrological star signs, because I'm Taurus, I have to be stubborn.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I did a personality test one time that said I'm an extrovert. I go and try to find out what it means to be an extrovert, and I do that more. And I think that goes to the heart of what Dweck is talking about as well, in terms of we are very easy to program ourselves with certain perceptions of ourselves. And that becomes the way that we express. And I think that's to your previous idea as well, in terms of saying, at the root, at the gene kind of level, we are somebody, and we get rewarded for being that person in context. And then to a point where we only live that person. And I think what Dweck is advocating to some extent and is that we should break out of that mindset. We should, because it's not useful in the long term to be only one personality, and you don't have to live as a personality in a particular way for the rest of your life. And in fact, you will probably have a lot of relief and a lot of ease once you start getting to know yourself outside of this persona that you have to project externally.
Yeah. She does in the later chapters speak of growth mindset personas and fixed mindset personas in that space. Just the last comment on this, Riaan, is this reference to Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, because he from his studies, he says that talent and practice account fairly equal for our ability. And she has, in that chapter on business, she really has a go on this talent mindset that she ascribes to the gurus of McKinsey. But we can say a bit more about that when we get to that chapter. But this whole notion of talent alone, she finds extremely a narrow view on this complexity.
Absolutely, and I think there's a dimension to sit and say what we tend to do with talent is to recognize talent, then we reward talent. Talent then feels that talent needs to perform. Talent can't perform at the level without having a growth mindset and making mistakes. And the minute they make mistakes, we shoot them down as not talent anymore, and that's where we lose the talent game. Yeah. And she's also extremely critical of the kind of millennial methodology, which says that, tell everybody that everything is great and that everything that they've done is positive, etc. She says, well, because then you don't have the struggle, and if you don't have the struggle, you never actually form the mental bridge to deliver on that. And I think Tanya makes a good point in the chat to sit and say the whole idea of neuroplasticity brings in the dimension that says it doesn't matter what personality type you are, you might just approach the idea of change differently depending on how you perceive and process information and experiences. And I think that is it. The growth mindset says that I am here on earth to have lifelong learning, and the minute I stop doing that, I must know that I'm kind of busy starting dying, if we can be as near to that.
Yeah. That concept is very nicely fleshed out in another book of a neurosurgeon. I think it's called the Mind That Changes Itself. And his dad had a stroke, and the family was actually furious with him because he took brain scans of his dad after the stroke. And then he took his dad into the backyard and he had him crawl like a baby in the backyard, and for some time, and the family thought he was really smoking something. And his dad fully recovered, and you should see the brain scans afterwards, because the notion is of that neuroplasticity, that which fires together, wires together. So he started firing from the old beginnings of hand-eye coordination with his dad crawling around like a baby in the backyard. And it's a fascinating case.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that the converse is also true, to sit and say, once it starts firing together, it almost forms a highway that has to be reprogrammed in order to be able to think differently. And it's only in building that discipline that you actually grow as a human being. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and the shadow side of that is, of course, is addictions. So,
cool.
So we are at chapter 2. We have to get to chapter 8 and another add to that. So
having so much fun.
And then in chapter 2, she delves into inside the mindsets, kind of where do they come from, and she is a bit vulnerable here and say when she envisioned a future kind of perfect job, perfect husband, because she observed that she had a fixed mindset, all her desires met not by hard work but simply because she deserved them. And she had to take a step back in terms of the space. And when she started looking at teenagers, and when they were given challenges, the teenagers with a fixed mindset, they find it difficult to participate in difficult tests or solutions because they were kind of afraid that they would become, as she called it, non-learners. They kind of expect ability to show up, and then Bob's your uncle, learning is in place. But those teenagers that believed in intelligence can be changed and can be developed, they had a total different approach. And then she makes this very important point. That attitude carries over into other parts of your life, partners, business, etc. And many times in partnerships or in relationships, with a fixed mindset, we expect the others kind of to idealize me because they have to confirm my capabilities, so that, and if they don't, I feel a failure. While those with a growth mindset kind of understood their flaws, they understood that their partner has a flaw, but they still loved, they still valued in the workplace, they still appreciated, because they work with that and they develop that.
Absolutely, and I'm just reminded all the time that, you know, we inadvertently reward people, and that kind of structures our continued relationship with them. And that's so true of children, is that they want to, if you tell them that they're smart, then they are damn afraid to make mistakes, you know. So
yeah.
And she does comment on that, and I'm sure we'll speak about that just now. But we have a question here in the chat on how do you get someone who has a fixed mindset to understand that they have a fixed mindset and that is the cause of their limitations.
So when you go to the very last part of the book, Changing Minds, you will get the answer there, and we may touch on that in a moment if we have the time to get there. But she does address it in different ways and how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think also just to touch on that, is to say that a person that has a fixed mindset will not believe that they are wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to create experiences that changes that, and that's the art of psychology. Really is about creating situations in which you unstuck a person in whatever that stuckness is. But if the reality, and I think she says that you have to go back to the source of it. You have to find the original place where it started from and start building from there. So your crawling analogy is a very nice one, Frik, in terms of go find in some way of form, if you don't confront where it comes from, you will always have the residual effect of that. And the person would have to face that. And that's not something that you can do to a person. That's something that a person needs to get to a point where they can do that in themselves as well.
Yeah, I think you would know from emotional intelligence, one of the first things that need to happen is self-awareness. Yeah. If that self-awareness is absent, then it's very difficult to start moving.
Yeah, and I think this is where the idea of triggers also come in, to sit and say, carefully investigate what in your interaction with them triggers them to do a certain thing. And Reinhardt's point around psychopaths and psychopaths as well. There's something that triggers that. Like whenever that person's in the room, we have to acknowledge that they're the greatest and the best idea. That if we don't praise them in this meeting, this is not going to be a successful meeting, you know.
Yeah.
That then creates a structure of performance, which if that doesn't happen, becomes a habit, etc. You know, so there's a whole range of things that play together here, and it's about triggers, understanding them and starting to point them out, and driving with them.
In that chapter on business around leadership, she speaks about those psychopaths and saying that these leaders that are almost these talent mindset leaders, these cocktail circuit leaders, they surround themselves with psychopaths. That's how they operate. They cannot afford being criticized in the process.
Yeah.
She does make the point in this chapter, and it's worth reading, and that is, if success is tied to your self-esteem, then every failure you believe is a blow to you.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful that you don't. So there is a difference between self-image and self-esteem. Self-image is the picture I hold of myself, and self-esteem is how I feel about that picture.
Yeah.
So if that picture is perfect, and then the activities and the criticism comes, then my feeling about that image is not good. So I try and avoid it and steer away from it. So, and I stunt growth in that way.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because like she gives lots of examples of that. I think one was John McEnroe, the famous tennis player, that to this day, or whenever he was asked, he would tell you why, as an external factor, every match that he lost. In that one, it was the cameraman. There was the sudden sound, and like I lost my concentration there. He never blames himself, and he never acknowledges that if he did more preparation and actually decided to grow in terms of being able to deal with a noise at the side of the thing, he would have not lost that point. You know, so we always, you can find these people in the people that constantly gives you the reason why somebody else or another external party or supplier or vendor or somebody in their team is the cause of them not being able to do whatever they needed to have done. And the growth mindset being more the people that sit and say, okay, there's a mistake, like, let's get on with it. How do we get this done? What can I learn from others? How can I bring in the best so that we learn from the opportunity, and to create a culture in which that's okay is obviously the business side of it.
Yeah, and I think the case study that she does around McEnroe is really worth reading.
It is. Frik, okay. You're going to have to keep us.
Oh, my word. Let me see. Okay, it's 1 minute past 1. Let's go. So in the third chapter, she delves into the truth about ability and accomplishments. And the point he makes here is that when we admire Thomas Edison, it's not really for his talent, because he had a well-supplied laboratory and a funded laboratory with a number of people around him. It is, and she says it was really about his tenacity and his drive to get that. And she delves a bit into the whole notion of ability, and she did research with studied pre-med college students, and she found that those with a growth mindset did and perform much better on their tests and approach their learning totally differently, because instead of trying to kind of memorize all the formulas, they went over their mistakes, try and find out, why did I make a mistake here, discovered it, looked for patterns and themes across it, which the other students who had a fixed mindset did not do, because they kind of thought in their talent capability mindset they can do it, so they just memorized and went the route course approach in doing them in doing their studies. So I think in the application of this, in all the areas that she applies this, she acknowledged the fact that everyone needs praise. You have to, you must praise your children. You must praise the people around you, your partner, etc. But then she says, be very careful. It's more important to praise the effort than praise the actual ability. So you don't praise your child and say, you are so intelligent, you're such a genius, you're absolutely a piano genius. Instead, say, I can see that you made a heck of an effort in studying this piece, and it shows in the way that you play it. So that's where the praise should be, on the effort and not necessarily on the ability.
Yeah. Something that I also found quite nice is also in something else that she did, where she talks about mark the process, like show that the process that you've been following has created the progress, because yes. I think often we can feel that the effort is like, oh, you sat there all night. Okay, then the kid thinks like, oh, okay, I just need to sit there all night and we'll be fine. And we do the same in business. I mean, like, you find toxic environments where everybody's sitting there past 10 because the CEO, every time they get to a company meeting, they just sit there and say, oh, and these people that were sitting there past 10. So then they think that that's what we should do to be recognized, you know, and it is, but praise the process that we got to, that got us to this point, to sit and say, you know, the team was very efficient in coming up with solutions, okay, and then that's just like, oh, we should come up with solutions. That's how we will get recognized and rewarded. Because effort can sometimes be misconstrued as I need to work dumb and dumber and more of it and be dumb longer than I've been dumb in the past, you know. So yeah, so we need to be very careful in terms of even these like broad statements of how they actually play out, and that's what I've appreciated about the way that you write. It becomes clear that you have to really be mindful around how we put out the message into our environments as leaders in terms of what we expect, because we will get exactly that.
Yeah. I think the other part that is very much worth reading in this chapter is the notion where she says, just as positive expectations can trip you up, so can negative stereotypes. And she refers to women specifically and ethnic minority groups. And one of the case studies that she has are the women students in a maths class at university. So those women that had almost a fixed mindset going into that space, they didn't do that well because they were in this space that they were stereotyped as not, women are not naturally inclined towards the STEM subjects, that kind of stupid stereotyping. And because they adopted that, as the semester went on, they started shrinking and they didn't have a sense of belonging. Yeah. At the same time, the women in there with a growth mindset who suffered under the same kind of stereotyping, they tend to stay there. And in spite of the stereotyping and sometimes silly remarks of male professors, they kind of took that in their stride, but they kept, when they failed, they tried something, and they did not confirm the stereotyping in the way that they operate, and they stayed the whole race and completed it, and at some point started to have a feeling of belonging in that group in the way that they have handled it. So, but I'm not doing it justice because I'm just scanning through it, but it's a fascinating description of what happened in that class.
Yeah, and there's some awesome sociological experiments that have pointed this out as well. And at some point in time, it'd be great to discuss some of that. Let's talk sports, Frik.
So in chapter 4, she applies this on sports, and she says, as with intelligence, our beliefs about athletic ability are divided between those who see it as innate. So I've got this talent of running very fast, so I've got it made. And then the other one that says, yeah, I can run, but I still need to do a lot of work. And what she found in her research is that the latter mindset is where the champions are coming from. Those that, referring back to what you said, Riaan, in terms of the process, that process that gets me to success. It's how they do that with very hard work. And then she in her studies, she asked this question, what is success? And the findings in that area is that those with a growth mindset found that success in doing their best in learning and improving. And this is exactly what she found in champions. And around the question, what is failure? The finding is those with a growth mindset, they use setbacks as motivating. It's kind of informative. It's a wake-up call. It's telling them, you can push it a bit harder. You sort of put a bit more effort in that. And then to that concept of yours, take charge of the process. People with a growth mindset, they really took charge of that process. They put their heads down. They followed that recipe in terms of their of practicing and exercising themselves in that space.
Yeah, I like this as an exercise that as a professor often gives the students, that says, go look at one of your heroes and then determine how they got there. And invariably, it works out that this person had to overcome their own perception of themselves, that they probably had the society that stacked up against them, and that they learned to fight and then applied that to the rest of their career. And that's what made them this hero. It's never a story of, oh yeah, his mother and father praised him to the point where he fully and fundamentally believed that now he is the hero and subsequently achieved greatness. You know, it's always a story of overcoming some level of own self-perception, adversity, taking charge, digging deeper and finding a place where nobody else has gone before, you know?
Yeah. I'm going to skip this, but when you read this chapter for the audience, just read this case study around Diane. I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it Nyat? It is very inspirational. And then also how she speaks about character and how character develops in the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. It's really interesting. So in chapter 5, she eventually gets to the mindset and leadership, and she got triggered by what happened at Enron, and she quotes then Malcolm Gladwell. It says, "This talent mindset is the new orthodoxy of American management. It created the blueprint for the Enron culture and sowed the seeds of demise." So she has a go at what she calls that comes from McKinsey and Company around this whole notion of talent mindset, where the idea is, just as you have naturals in sport, you have naturals in business. So as sports teams go out and write big checks for naturals out there, you should go out and find yourself naturals in business and write big checks and get them into the corporation. You should spare no expense for these big talent. Get them into, because that's the only way you're going to beat the competition. And she unpacks that so that you really understand. But that is a bit of a nonsense strategy.
No, absolutely. I think that's enough said, Frik. Yeah, I mean, like a person is a person in a context, and that's ultimately what we have to realize. And talent, I mean, I'm looking now in my own environments. Talent are the people that are passionate about what they do. They're willing to learn. They're open to the possibility that there's a different way to do things, and they just go at it. You know, that's talent. Talent isn't somebody that we paid a lot of money for. And in fact, you find, ironically, it's probably the people that you pay less that's talent, because they're trying to push up and they're trying to show themselves, etc. You know, so maybe one of the ways that we can use the McKinsey talent strategy is to set up those top guys for failure, so that the bottom guys feel that they can definitely do better. You know, but I think it's enough said. You know, but that being said, I do want to cover the CEO mindset from McKinsey fairly soon with you. So let's maybe look at it from the other side as well.
Let's give them a fair opportunity to.
Absolutely.
But she taps into the 5-year research of Jim Collins, Good to Great. And what is very interesting there that resonates with the growth mindset is that the good leader is not always this charismatic, confident individual, but rather the person who questions things, that takes nothing for granted, is always striving for something better. And she says in all of the research that Collins did, that was the one thing that was absolutely key, is the type of leader who in every case led the company to greatness was not this charismatic individual. They were not larger than life people. She used the word oozed ego people in that space. But they were people constantly asking the questions, trying to learn, asking the people in that space. And the notion is that those charismatic leaders need to tend to be arrogant And that is many times the downfall of them, because they so believe in their own superiority that they don't really respect the workers. They're just minions that have to serve me in this greatness that I'm displaying to the rest of the world. She touches. Yeah,
But I
sorry.
think I also think that there's a risk in that you can also create a fixed growth mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's something that just comes in and questions everything all the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and never is willing to look at it from a different perspective as well. I have seen it a couple of times where it just goes a little bit too far. So there's two sides to that coin, I think, as with all things.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the difference is in the motive behind the questioning. If the motive behind the questioning is to learn, to discover, to make better, to perform. But if the motive is to interrogate or make people feel bad, whatever, then that is the shadow side of that.
Exactly.
She deals with a study of the mindset with Goodman and Bandura in terms of I think it was an MBA class or something. Very interesting if you read about that, the decision making, how it is impacted with a fixed, and she sets up the one group with a fixed mindset, kind of saying this exercise is to, you've got this capabilities, and this will then just test your capabilities, and your capabilities you can use and you will perform. The other group she set up with a growth mindset and say management capabilities need to be developed through practice, etc. So here's the exercise. When you fail, try this. So at the end, with the two groups, that the second group ended up with far more productive results than the first group in that space. Sensory Intelligence of a Local Author, which is a great book. And then we have a book called The Systemic Stairway, which we also have the author coming to join us, a very practical management book for, he says, for anyone who needs to manage anything. So a very practical book and every step of the way. But we will inform you in due time. Just to remind you, if you do get an email and it says Stellenbosch Business Institute, we are not confused. We have explained that. So, but thank you for being here. Thank you, Riaan, for joining me, for participating in the conversation. Looking forward to our next session. Thank you, Wayne, at the background.
Apparently, one of the guests said that it's brilliant, and I'm just going to answer not yet.
just to be consistent.
Yes.
Thanks, Wayne. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.